Next, I'd like to turn to Steve Sherrill. Remember,
Uh-oh.
Steve came up with this great idea. What do you want to talk about? And that's how I introduce him each week. So, Steve, what do you want to talk about?
First, I got to figure out how to get these fingers apart from that glue. I tried all those glues, and this is what I ended up with. So, anyway, that was very interesting in the glue. And I also want to mention that Tom has a Facebook group that you can try to be a member of and see more of his work. So it's definitely worth, applying for membership to be a part of that. I was accepted, and thank you, Tom.
Thank you for the plug. It's the Rustic Buff, the ON30 Rustic Buff, an old Gothic model railroad on Facebook, and has my old railroad on there, and then the new one's starting to fade in. But thank you for the plug. We got 700 members.
You don't need much help.
Want to get it to 1,000.
The first 1,000 gets what? Tonight, I wanted to kind of ask a couple of questions here, and I'd like to get a lot of input if I can. I want to ask a question. The questions are you a model railroader or are you a railroad modeler? So I want everybody to think about those two terms for just a minute. I kind of separate those two as, to make it simple, people who have a layout and people who don't. And that's very simple, and takes a lot of people. We have armchair modelers who I think are railroad modelers. We have people who build prototype railroads, and they're probably model railroaders. And then we have guys like me who aren't prototype modelers, but have, track down, build modelers, and simply operate my railroad to have fun. We have some very good builders of models in this group. I don't know how many of you have railroads or track that were a part of any group that does operate locomotives and trains. So I get a little confused as to where we are as individuals in the hobby. And so if I, ask, what are you doing? Are you a builder, a modeler, or where are you? And, so I asked that question. If anybody can give me an answer where they are.
So Steve, this is Phil. I would kind of suggest that maybe need to think about it a little slightly differently. I mean, I think there are people that model railroads, and their interest is primarily in railroading, and that folks on that side of the coin tend to be the guys who do operations, and it's modeling the context of a railroad. Then there are people that happen to model railroad stuff, but they're not that much interested in that railroad side. And I think that kind of comes down to it. It struck me for a long time that there are four kind of, I'll call for lack of a better word, areas of the hobby. There are people who like to build things, whether you're building a building model, you're doing scenery, it's the act of actually creating something. Then there are folks who like to run trains. They've created an environment where they can run trains through it and watch trains run through it, but their interest is predominantly in watching trains run. Then there are folks who are collectors, people who collect things, and they get a lot of their value in the hobby out of collecting, whether that's collecting brass models or collecting plastic models or collecting kits. They're basically collectors. And then the last group are the folks who actually like to do operations. I mean, it was a really interesting kind of view of the number of layouts in the NMRA convention that had little to no scenery. And it was kind of, somebody built the layout, they got it to the point they could operate on it, they could have a crew come over and do an operating session, and they were going to do scenery, but it really wasn't that important to their primary focus, which was emulating a railroad in model form. And so I think there's kind of because there are people who build layouts for different reasons. I mean, some build layouts to have an operational environment to recreate a railroading context. Some people just build a layout to run their trains through and watch their trains run. So I think that you have to be a little cognizant of those differences in how people do things. And there are prolific modelers that don't have a layout. And there really are modelers who build a lot but don't have a layout.
Mhm.
So, I think the question is, are they they are modeling railroad stuff, but they're not personally trying to emulate a railroad context or environment. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. My thought was the people who build very, very nice models, dioramas, from my standpoint, I don't see how they're just satisfied with that. Why they don't have a train running through that with some kind of movement. I just get a little bit confused as a modeler who has always had a train layout and always built models, how you can have a quality of when you go to like a narrow gauge convention and that guy will spend a year building one model and it'll be very detailed, and then they don't have any layout to really show it off. The only time they show it off is at a convention. I just think that there's,
Steve,
yes.
my new rustic buff and old Gothic railroad, I mean, it does three things for me. It's designed for continuous running, so you can just run trains round and round and round. It's also designed for point-to-point operation. And then obviously I detail the living hell out of it. So I cover three of the, and it's loosely based on Southern Indiana and Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And it's all fictitious. So, I think it's such a flexible hobby. You just pick and choose what you want to do with it,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just would like to see, again, from my standpoint, everybody has a train layout. I'm lucky that I have train layouts and great modelers, master model railroads within short driving distance of where I live, that I can see all of these facets of the hobby put together. I just think that the hobby is really a combination of all those things for me. And when I see, modelers who only have one or two facets of that, there's more growth that they can develop, So I just, yeah.
Pat here. I think the key word we got to remember this is a hobby.
Yes.
And not everyone's tastes are the same. And not everyone has the room to build a huge layout. And some have the room to do modeling and detail and show it off at some of the shows. I mean, it's everybody's tastes are different. If they were all the same, I think it'd be pretty boring. Let's put it that way. But anyway, it's just, I find it's a hobby that we enjoy. And some of us put more emphasis on the detailing of stuff or the emphasis on the scenery, or their emphasis is on electrical. It has all of these entities tied into one, if you want to use it that way. So
yes.
That's the way I look at it. I mean, not everybody's going to be an MMR. I mean, but they'll really do their best at what they like to enjoy at what they're doing.
Right. Well, I agree with that. I think that, like you just mentioned, some people love electronics. Well, this is a great time to be in electronics right now. There's a lot of stuff that will really challenge you. And they help modelers who are not as adept at electronics as they are. And so they fulfill a gap. And they also, you'll see they'll pick up a throttle and they'll run a train and enjoy that, even though they don't have the room for a layout. I think that opens up an area where we have the small layouts and shelf layout designs that are becoming more and more popular now, I believe. I don't know what you saw or whoever went to the NMRA convention, what kind of layouts did you see? Were they huge? Were they small? Were they highly detailed? Share with us what you saw. So maybe we know we're not out here as lone wolves without a layout, or you have a little shelf layout or a micro layout, that there are other people who are in the same boat as we are and the same state of mind. We're all individuals. We don't get together up maybe once or twice a year, except on Zooms. And Zooms are only a certain length of time that we can share our thoughts and what we're doing. So I just, kind of always have wondered, there's always been a separation between a model railroader and a railroad modeler. And that's where I am. That's not where, the hobby is the hobby, like you say. I just believe that there's, 6 or 7 parts to make this a wonderful hobby, where you can really enjoy it the most that you can get out of it. And again, there are people who like building just dioramas. Some people like just building bridges, and they do it from an engineering standpoint, and it's perfect. Whereas, you and I might throw something together that, looks good, but probably wouldn't, you couldn't run a bucket across it, type of thing. But it's just such a great hobby that you kind of want everybody to be, in the perfect state that maybe you think you're in.
And I personally think that's incredibly pejorative. The reality is, I think the majority of people that are in the hobby probably don't have a layout.
You think?
Yeah, I think so. There are an awful lot of people that don't have a layout. They may be part of a club. They may be part of one or more layouts that they participate with an owner in, that they're kind of a group. I mean, I think there's a large percentage of the modeling community there. And, I think the perspective here is really simple. Why do you choose to model something that's a model railroad thing versus a tank? So why do you go into model railroading versus military modeling and tanks? And tanks are clearly standalone, with some exceptions. They're not automated or operational. They're very much static models, and they're kind of individual, and they fit in the class. And we have the option for people to do that, but then also to participate. If you build a really great engine, you build that really great one-off ON30 little engine. You can go to a club and run it on somebody's club, or you can go over to somebody's house and run it at their house and take pictures. And so I think there's this idea of the immutability you get of, as a community, we can offer people who don't have, space for a layout, a space that they can get involved in building things for a layout and building the components layout, either as a club or part of a group. And I think kind of trying to define that you're defined by whether or not you have a layout is incredibly pejorative, and may be very much kind of the thing that cause people to say, well, if I don't think I'm ever going to be able to build a layout, then maybe I shouldn't be a model railroader. In other words, if that's the real quote unquote barrier line that says you're not a real model railroader. And I kind of take back, the latest MMR we had out here in the Coast Division doesn't have a layout. He participates in 2 layouts. And if you go to both of those layouts, you'll see absolutely amazing structures he's built on those layouts. And so, to kind of come back and say he's less because he doesn't have a layout in his garage or in his space, I think is a real challenge. I think that's between us. I think that's been one of the problems in this hobby I think it's one of the problems the NMRA has had is this exclusionary thing, right? You're not a real model railroader if you do 3-rail. You're not a real model railroader if you don't have a big layout. You know, and I think that causes people to say, well, maybe I should just go do something else. So I think I would have much more inclusive view of saying we're all part of the model railroading hobby. We just have different interests. And what we want to do is connect people together with different interests so you can have a more fulfilling experience and you can take advantage of the fact that things move, even if you don't have a layout at home. I don't know. I tend to want to be more inclusive versus drawing lines and saying, you know, some of us are on this side of the line and some of us on this side of the line. If you're on this side of the line, these pigs are more equal on this side of the line. I personally think just take those lines off and say, I don't care whether you have a layout or not. You know, if you build amazing structures and you partner with Tom to put them on his layout, that's great. Or if you build a great ON30 engine and Tom has, you know, a day open and you bring your engine over and run it, you know, you now are taking advantage of the fact that it's mobile and you can put it into an environment. You just don't own the environment. I don't know. I tend to want to be more inclusive because I think that's how we grow the hobby.
Well, I know.
Phil, I couldn't agree more. And Phil, that's why this is a modeling show. You know, I don't care whether it's 3-rail, whether it's 2-rail, whether you have a model railroad. I don't care. If you're a modeler, that's all. Then this is a show for you, because we'll hopefully help you build better models, and you'll want to build more models. And I couldn't agree more. I don't see the advantage, particularly in this day and time, of people necessarily having to have a model railroad at home that they own in order to be in the model railroad family. I think those days are gone. I think the days of the large railroads are gone because people can't afford them and they don't have space for them. And they don't have the time.
Well, I agree with you on that.
I've heard Phil say, for example, here I am 60 years old. I think you're 60 or 60, right about 60. And if it takes me 20 years to build the kind of railroad that I want to have at home, am I willing to take the time in the next 20 years of my life to build it?
Well, what Jim brings up is actually a really interesting comment. So I was actually going to show this at some point. Visited a layout up in Yuba City, and it's a 35 by 55 foot building with an absolutely amazing O-scale layout in it. Duplicates 2 cities, Marysville and Yuba City, that are right in that area. Also, as the rest of the Western Pacific, has a about half size, and that's in terms of the length of the buildings, version of the Sacramento shops. Just an amazing layout. And when I talked to the owner, I said, well, when did you start building this? He said, I started building it in 2009. I built the building, and I started in 2010 with a young man who worked for the contractor, and we started building bench work. And I realized very quickly that I was not going to be able to complete what I wanted to do. And he said, so he actually hired Vargas Brothers. There are 2 brothers out here that run a custom model railroad building company, and hired them. And they did most, as far as I could tell, most of the work. And a lot of the buildings and stuff he'd had built by other people. What I realized was, I looked at him, he's in his 80s now. He really was not able to even come out to the building where they were still building on his model railroad. And what I realized was he made a decision 10 years ago that there was no way he could finish to the level he wanted to, the model railroad he wanted to build. So he hired somebody to build it. And there's another side. I was talking to one of the guys from down in Santa Cruz, and this is where Jim Vale was and a bunch of very good modelers. And he made the comment, he said, I moved here 20 years ago and I met all these amazing model railroaders who'd all been here for about 20 years, and they were finishing their layouts, and they all helped me with my layout. And we worked on my layout. Now it's 20 years later, and my layout is almost getting to be done. And it can come back to Jim's comment, for that person who's 65 and all of a sudden has the space and the time to build a layout. You begin to look at 20 years, and the probability of having time to enjoy it is less. So I think the same thing applies to the operations guys. A lot of guys that build an operating layout, their goal is to get to the point where they can have that big operating session and emulate an actual railroad. and scenery and buildings are really a secondary accoutrement to that.
Okay.
So, it's a really interesting thought process about, I used to kind of have this thing. I walked in, I'd see a layout that was a plywood Pacific, and it was like, wow, not much here. But then when I realized a lot of those guys, for them, it's that operation thing, which, by the way, for all of us here that don't do operations, it's a whole different challenge for you than building a model, right? Building a model is one kind of intellectual challenge. Taking on a very heavy, high volume yard and figuring out how to switch it, how to block the cars, how to get them to the right point, how to build the trains, and how to do it in a way that you don't screw up the whole railroad. That's a completely different intellectual challenge. And I think all these things are good, and it's what people get excited about. And I think I think we should be very inclusive. Model railroading is everything. There are some people that are more modelers and some people that are more railroaders. I would almost say it that way. The railroaders are more the operations focused folks. The modelers are more the people who build things, whether you build, and both of them can build a layout. The layouts just may have different goals. One may be incredibly detailed and not designed for operations, and one may be much less finished and scenic than detailed and built for operations. Anyway, enough said. I'm saying too much, dominating. Sorry.
No, you're
I
doing
just
good.
wanted to say, I just wanted to say one of the things I haven't heard mentioned tonight is modular model railroading, like Fremont. I belong to a Fremont club, and we assemble a whole bunch of modules together, and bingo, we got this great big layout to run, and we can do operations. We can just sit back and watch it go. But every time we set up, it's a little different setup. So it keeps it fresh. And the thing is, we're talking about a lot of people that don't have big layouts. That is a nice outlet, because now you can run that long train on a long layout. Or it can be a short train, depending on your sidings. But anyway, it's just another aspect of the hobby that it's quite well enjoyed in Southern Ontario here. And it also, I think, in the States, it's really big too, compared to what it was before. So it's just another way of expressing your modeling and your work. And it's good. It's a lot of fun.
And,
Anyway.
and I think that's, one of the huge advantages to modulars. I'm part of an ON30 group. We're going to do 5 setups between now and Christmas, including at the California State Railroad Museum and the round table there.
Wow.
So we do fairly large setups. I mean, we typically have at least 20, sometimes 35 to 40 modules we set up. And, the other thing that's great about that is that you're actually out showing model railroading to the public. And it's shown in a way that's addressable. I mean, the thing that's interesting is the biggest barrier to model railroading for a 30 or 40-year-old is space.
Yeah.
They don't have space. So what I do is
Exactly.
we have a 2x4 foot module that's a raw module that we take to shows, and we put it up, set it up with the feet on it, and say, build this module. And the point is to tell somebody, you can take that module and hang it on the wall. You guys saw the module that I guess I got teased a bit for the pictures of the module last week. That's that Wilder Ranch module. That module, if you look underneath it, it's actually got a gate handle, like you put on an outdoor gate mounted in the middle of the module, and you can pick it up by that gate handle and just move the module around. And you can actually take it and glue it, put hooks on a wall and hang it on a wall and hang it up as art on a wall. And so, the idea of being able to say to someone, you don't have to dedicate a bedroom. I mean, people in 2 or 3 bedroom houses don't have a bedroom to generate. They don't want to give up their garage if they have it. So, all of a sudden the idea of, I can build my own 4-foot module and be part of this group and go do that. I think that's, incredible way to get people engaged in the hobby and starting up. So same thing with Fremont. It doesn't matter what modular group it is, whether it's an HO, N, ON30, doesn't really matter which one it is. It's, it's the idea you're getting into a group, and it's the same. The other benefit it brings is the benefit this meeting brings, which is the social benefit of the social interaction of the groups you build, which is kind of the other side of model railroading we really don't talk about as much. Is each one of those things tends to lead you to different groups.
This is what I try to do with the micros when I show them.
is to, when I talk to people and find out that, hey, they're planning some big railroad, like you say, 30 by 50. And with my own experience, I know that, that's like forever. I try to talk them into, or tell them, hey, start out with something small and develop your techniques, and you'll still be enjoying the hobby and running trains. You'll still be able to go to the shows and buy stuff. And it's just another way to show people that you don't need a lot of space. It's the same thing with the Fremos. The modules for the ON30, the 2x4. You put a couple of 2x4s together, and you have, what's a 2x8, and you can put a scene and have a little running on a 2x8, which doesn't take up that much room in a garage if you live in an area that you have some nice weather in the garage, or in a part of a bedroom somewhere. There are just lots of things that we can do as model railroaders or modelers to enjoy the hobby a little bit more, I think, rather than just putting a model on the shelf. Now, when you went to the MRA convention, did they have any small layouts on display?
There were not very many small layouts. Bedroom size was kind of the smallest I saw there. And, being in Dallas, there were some very large integrated layouts with homes. I mean, we're 2,000 square foot built into the house of space above the garage and part of the house that was a layout. And then, external buildings that were, 45, 50 by 25. So there are a number of very large layouts that people are building, but they tend to all be folks that are in their 60s that are mainly retired and have moved into a retirement home. I mean, retirement home not being a retirement home, but a home that they're planning on living their retirement out in.
Yeah, that's, my first layout. I had lived in that house for 15 years. And then, I'm constructing this new layout, which is quite large, 35 feet by, let's call it 10 or 12. And it's a little daunting, the amount of, if you look at how long it's going to take to super detail a layout of that size, you've got your hands full, there's a lot of time investment there, but that's why I'm doing it, so the end justifies the means. Every day it's what I do, so.
Tom, are you able to take a lot from your old layout and work it into your new layout?
All the structures, so I got a big jump start there. None of the track work, none of the bench work, but all the structures, are just sitting around the layout. They're all on plywood bases, and as I move around the layout, I integrate them into the new layout. So it won't take 15 years to get where I was in the last layout, but it'll take every bit of 5.
So are you concentrating now on the structures, or are you do you have enough rolling stock and engines?
I have enough, several hobby shops of engines and model. I have so much.
I remember. So I remember the shelf.
I have, there's no lack of engine or rolling stock for the rustic buff. They're in boxes after boxes. What I'm doing is working on where you enter the railroad. We enter the railroad room, you go up the steps, and the first thing you see is what's behind me. I'm working on just the first impact when you walk into the room. So I'm working clockwise, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So Steve, I think you opened a great subject for tonight's discussion. Thank you so very much for doing that.